Well, can people of color flourish in our society? What are the disadvantages to being a person of color in our society? And how can people overcome them to do well? We're going to be talking about that today and a whole lot more on the Brian Hirsch Show. Well, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you may be. I hope this video and or podcast finds you well. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is kind of a hot topic, hopefully that will not only capture your interest, but also provide some perspective and some insight into difficult things. And, in the wake of some of the things that have transpired over the last 4 or 5 years, it seems in many precincts that racial tensions are higher and people find it difficult to navigate what is very emotional for a lot of people. But you need to know that from my perspective, my heart personally is for all people, whether they be white, black, brown, yellow, or red, that they flourish and prosper and do well. And I believe that is the heart of God. And so today we want to talk about this, to delve into some of these difficult issues and hopefully find some perspective and some solutions. And to help us do that, we've invited on a very, very special guest to join us. And his name is Dr. Henry Young from Victor Valley College. So everybody, please welcome Dr. Young. What is up, my brother?
Good morning. Good morning and afternoon, everyone.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, my brother. I mean, better now that I've got to see your amazing smile and hear your voice today. So
and look at you. Hey, if I had known that you were going to dress so nicely, I'd have put on a coat and tie.
It's first day of second 8 weeks here over at the college. So we got students coming back. We had spring break last week, so I had to do some rounds on campus today. So I had to kind of look the part.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit about what you do there at the college. What is your role there?
Great. So, Brian, I'm the dean, one of the dean of instructions here at Victor Valley College. In particular, my area is business law and academic resources, which incorporates, of course, the programs in our business department: political science, restaurant management, business education technology, business real estate, just to name a few. And then also, I'm the dean of the library. And when I say the dean of, I'm just the manager or supervisor of the area. Also the manager of tutoring and or the dean of tutoring and the dean of distance education here on campus. One of the new things that I've just become also a part of and that I'm really excited about, I think that lends to the discussion that some of the things we're going to talk about, is I'm the dean of justice involved education. And we have a program now where we are providing a sociology degree and a business degree to those individuals that are incarcerated now for justice involved things. So again, I think it's a paramount. But to that point, I've taught economics and accounting here for 28 years at Victor Valley College. Went back and finished my terminal degree about 6 years ago. Just thought it was something that I'd always aspired to have the title and to be able to share with my students, the experience of having a terminal degree. So went back and got my doctorate and had aspirations of being a dean. And the Lord works in his way, and mysteriously, 3 years later, after being the academic senate president here on campus, I am now the dean. So I've been the dean for about 6 months. So I'm in my first year. So learning a lot. And just looking to help students and also help to bring in the enormity of resources when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And being a man of color, I think that I have some lens in terms of how what it means to be successful, but more importantly, identify elements of the journey that I'd like to just share.
Right.
That the whole journey.
100%. I was visiting with my wife last night a little bit about what, the topic of today's show and what we're going to be discussing. And she said, "Now, your guest is a person of color, right?" And I said, "Yes, he is." And of course, it would be perhaps a little bit of a challenge for two white guys to discuss this topic today. So
Sure.
you've been at the college for almost 30 years.
Almost, yeah, 28 and a half, give or take. Yeah, 28 and a half.
So
So it's
you came on in the early 90s then.
early 90s. Yeah,
Yeah,
came on as a part-time instructor, and I was a basketball coach because I played basketball in college, as you know, played for
right.
Cal Poly Pomona, the Broncos, on scholarship there. And the coach that recruited me from Crossroads, a private school that I went to in Santa Monica, Dr. Bruce Victor, actually was coaching here. And I don't know, me and my first wife, we bought a house up here in Victorville, and I just happened to come down Bear Valley, and I said, there's an institution I want to play some ball, so I went down to the gym. Lo and behold, the head coach is Bruce Victor. He says, "Hey, Henry, are you interested in coaching?" Of course, I go, "Yes." So I was brought on as a part-time faculty member and an assistant basketball coach. Well, then that worked into I ended up quitting my job in Anaheim. I worked for a defense contractor, Navcom Defense Electronics. I was a manufacturing engineer, with my bachelor's degree is in operations management and research. So left that job and started teaching here full time. It just happened that they had to let go an economics professor, and my MBA had my focus and emphasis in finance and economics. And so they said, "Hey, we want to give you a job, part time, full time." I'll have to explain to you on another podcast what that means. But anyway, I came on and taught 5 classes for about 4 years before I was actually able to apply for the full-time position in the business department. And
Gotcha.
yeah, 28 years later, here I am, dean of instruction.
So, I mean, the high desert, for all intents and purposes, now, more than half your life is home.
Mhm.
But where did you grow up?
Denver, Colorado, originally. Yeah, Denver, Colorado. Spent, I guess you can say, majority of my early childhood up to the age of 14 in Denver, Colorado, and then moved out here to California. My dad was incarcerated at that time, and my mom moved out here and brought us, my sister and I, with her. And the rest is history. I think I've shared with you that my uncle's Philip Bailey of Earth, Wind, and Fire. So he brought us out after my dad was incarcerated, put us up in an apartment, until my mom got her stuff together. And then, the rest is history. I was able to go to a private high school, Crossroads School of Fine Arts and Sciences, just by virtue of where I lived with my uncle. But moreover, I was on basketball scholarship there. So you
This
probably
was
hear
in Los Angeles.
that. Yes, correct.
So, yeah, yeah, I knew that your uncle was the lead singer of Earth, Wind, and Fire, which, by the way, is really cool.
Right.
But I don't think I knew that caveat that he was instrumental in bringing your family out of
Yes,
a tough
yes.
situation. So,
By all means, yeah. And I love my dad. Of course, we also go through journeys and we learn from each other's mistakes, right? And so one of the things unfortunately, my dad didn't go the same route that I went. And I share this if I speak to any young students or people that I know, that I just took a different route, but I can appreciate the route that my dad took because I wouldn't have had the juxtaposition really to know, right,
right,
of the other paths. But with that being said, yeah, so my dad was incarcerated, and unfortunately, my mom was assaulted pretty badly because of some things that my dad was doing. He was selling some drugs and different things. He had some not so nice friends. So when he got locked up, there was things that happened, and my mom happened to be involved, and she was actually she was beat up really bad, right? And so my
mm,
uncle at that time had just joined Earth, Wind, and Fire and said, "Okay, I'm going to move my sister out of Denver," because there was just a ecosystem of people that knew my father,
right,
then might come and take stuff out on my mom
right.
and or me and my. So my uncle moved us out, and as I mentioned, I went to Hamilton High School at my 10th grade year, and then got a scholarship to Crossroads School to play basketball my junior and senior year. We won city championship my junior year, went to state, and then we went to the city championship my senior year, but we did not win. But my point is that yeah, my uncle was instrumental. I every time I talk to him, I just saw him this past weekend because my mom is in the hospital, but she's doing much better. I always say, Uncle, thank you for
Mm,
the opportunity, right? And so I say all that to say that a lot of times when I look at others and I kind of compare myself, I did have a leg up, right? I was able to come out of Denver, Colorado, because had it not been for my uncle, I might have went down the same road that my father went down
right,
because that's what I
right.
saw.
Right, and that needs to be a message of encouragement for all of us and what we're doing for other people and our kids and the generations coming behind us, which maybe is another podcast that we can do. But when you and we've spoken a couple of times on some of these issues, but we ran into each other at McDonald's a couple of weeks ago, and we talked a little bit about what we're discussing today. And the assertion that I made was that the system, and by the system, I mean, I'm talking about our system of economics
Mhm.
and our system of essentially our system of laws and how our society is set up, doesn't reward ethnicity or race. The system doesn't care what color you are, but
Yeah,
what it does reward are behaviors.
right.
And we can talk a little, I want to talk a little bit about some of those behaviors, identify some of them. But to kind of help us bridge that gap and get into that, you said that you were at a conference of,
Mhm.
I guess it was predominantly African American. Were they all educators?
Yes,
Okay. And that one of the things that came up was that our system is
yeah,
a Eurocentric system.
right.
And I think to kind of lead into what I'm going to ask you is we could kind of say to that, yeah, like, no, duh. Like the
Mhm.
whole thing was set up by a bunch of Brits that came over here from England to escape oppression and colonize this part of the world, and
Mhm.
eventually, sign the Declaration of Independence and create their own country. And they
Right.
were all European people, so they're going to bring with them a value system that was, based in that area. But I think probably what would be helpful for us to get our heads wrapped around this is when you say, or when at the conference, it is a
Mhm.
Eurocentric system. What are the two or three or four things that kind of are hallmarks or identifiers on what
Yeah.
that means?
Well, I mean, the first thing I might add is that, and I say this too on the podcast, I really appreciate you having me on. And I want, as I talk about these things, again, these are, Henry Young's views, the way I see things. So I'm not
Sure.
speaking for my institution, for my program, but I'm speaking just as a man, right? Who's
Sure.
been involved in some things. So, but with that being said, I think that inherently one of the things that came out of that is that like racism is an ordinary way of the way that we do business in our country. I mean, it's a derivative, of course, of not only slavery, not only what was done, and then again, in my view, to maybe Indians and or more importantly the Jews. It's a situation of who is in control, right?
Mm,
Who has the governing influence? So
yeah.
when we think about Eurocentric, that's where the control comes from, right? And so when I get into some dialogues about, well, with individuals about racism, one might argue that there isn't any. And I go, well, how can there not be?
Right.
In large regard, when we think of, the 1619 Project, and it talks about when the first, and I'm domaining this as a Black man who arguably has, ancestors who were slaves. Um, the first slave ship that came over from Africa. And one would argue, well, there was slavery happening in Africa, right? Because we had kings in Africa that were fighting with other factions, and
Right.
they would enslave the people, right? And then ultimately you say, well, what's good for goose is good for the gander. However, in my mind, being brought over to this country for that main purpose. And so then, history would obviously say or show that this country was built in large part on the backs of people. Now, with that being said, and I say that respectfully, so it's about the control, right? Who has the control of resources?
Hmm.
Some might argue too that racism is impossible to eradicate unless we acknowledge it.
Mm.
Right? And so within that process, because it's difficult too for me as a man of color to say, well, do we want to continue to say what we don't have? Do we want to continue to say from a deficit perspective, well, you are black, so therefore you are going to be less than? Well, I mean, I understand that. I mean, I've been in a store where someone would ask me, can I help them find clothes when I'm in the store to buy the clothes? Now,
Mm.
on the one hand, I go, well, maybe it's just your smile, it's your demeanor, it's your ability to actually communicate. And they go, wow, this guy is really pleasant. Maybe it's not a fact that they're saying that you're less than, you're not a buyer, you're a worker, right? So, I've had to kind of really think about that, and it used to annoy me. But let me get back to the point. So, in terms of governance, then we talk about laws, right? Legislative pieces. And I'm not a historian by any stretch, but I was talking to someone about Newton T. Bass, right? When we talk
Mm.
about structural racism. And and I don't know that I actually should share this because I haven't done my history, but I heard that, when Newton T. Bass was doing all of his things up here in the high desert in terms of development, that there were certain areas where
Right.
blacks were able to live.
Yeah, it's the old redlining
The
law
redlining
and
piece.
block busting,
Right.
and yeah, yeah.
So with that in mind, when we talk about but who has the control, well, if we're talking about zoning, if we're talking about real estate in areas in which where blacks and or people of color might live, then that's again that all goes back to who has the control.
Sure.
Who possesses the governing power. Um, and people might say, well, Barack Obama was the worst president. Hey, I get it. I understand that. I mean, I'm a Republican as a voting person, right? I mean, the ideology of less government is where that's what I'm about, right? Of capitalism in the truest sense. But hey, I've been able to succeed. So don't tell my mom. My mom may not be watching this. She's well, I can't believe you as a Republican. But I agreed. I was galvanized by the fact that we had a black president
Mm.
because of the socialization of a black man saying what was possible,
Right.
right? In terms of saying, "Aha, I can do that," right? So again, I digress a bit, but I think that that's where one of the key factors are is who has the control. The other piece is then when we talk about control, we look at economics, right? We look at who's providing the jobs, who's getting the jobs. We look at history in terms of different areas. I've never been back down south, and even at this point in my who I am today, I'm not really going down south real quickly because I
Mm.
know that there are still some,
Yeah.
some under tenant, we know
Yeah.
Jim Crow laws, but I'm not one to say I need to go back down south,
Yeah.
to experience or to see flags or things that go against me that I would feel as a black man. So, but again, going back to the conference, one of the things that educators are saying is obviously knowledge is power, right?
Mm.
Knowledge is power. And so not to focus on what we don't have, but that's focus on what we do have and really developing programs, developing advocacy groups that, look at identifying what are the things that are necessary for success, in particular in the academic realm, which, I'm an academic and I really feel that without my high school degree, without my college degrees, I wouldn't be half of the man I am intellectually. Maybe not
Right.
in terms of earning power, but
Right.
intellectually. So.
So a couple of thoughts for you. So you're saying that Eurocentric
Mhm.
system really has more to do with the generational control.
Control.
Who in in by nature of the fact that it was Europeans that
Hmm.
founded the country, that came over
Hmm.
here, and
Hmm.
and all of the things that we talked about,
Right.
over the course of 300 years, those are
Right.
the same people, or their descendants, are going to
Mhm.
have control of resources, have control of capital, have control of the the system of laws, and so on and so forth.
Correct.
And I think that as it pertains to racism, I want to throw this out to you,
Okay.
and I'm going to give you my definition of racism and how I think of racism, and then you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. For me, and this is one of the problems, is the definition of terms begins to change. Okay,
Hmm.
so and this is something that the left is very good at. All of a sudden, what I thought to be racism is completely redefined, or what a racist is.
Yeah.
But to me, a racist is a person, not a system. I don't think
Mm.
that it's possible for a system to be racist, because a system is not a person.
Mm.
It's a person who, by nature of the fact that somebody would be a different ethnicity or race,
Mhm.
I don't even know you, don't know anything about you, don't care to know anything about you. And just by nature of the fact that in the case of you, you're a
Mhm.
black man, I immediately hold you in contempt simply because of your race. I don't even know you.
Right.
And it is the exact perpendicular way of thinking that Dr. Martin Luther King promoted in his
Mhm.
grand speech, I Have a Dream.
Right.
That I have a dream
Yeah.
that my children and grandchildren will grow up in a country
Mhm.
and be judged
Mhm.
not by the color of their skin, but by the
Mm.
content of their character.
Mm.
The opposite of that would be, I don't care about the content of your character. I'm just judging the book by its cover.
Right.
That to me is racist, and at its very core is evil. Am I going wrong in my estimation?
No, again, I know that at this point, as two men, we're juxtaposing your views maybe against mine, and I get that, and I would agree with you wholeheartedly. Not that I have to. The only thing that I might differ a bit is that I would agree that people are racist, but it is those people that make up those systems, right?
Mhm.
Ultimately, and I know that that was in as you thought about that, you were going to the granular level, that there has to be a human being that is making a conscious decision, you know, just literally, that I am going to treat someone with an inferior that and say that they are inferior. And so I would just land that racism is a situation that one party views another party as being less than,
Right.
right? As being inferior. And by virtue of that, then culture then is a derivative of that. I think you mentioned earlier, like if you come into my home and you stay with me for any time, you're going to see that the culture of Henry Young, right?
Right.
What do I do in the morning? What do I do in the evening or in the afternoon? What do I do at night? And if you're there long enough, then you're probably going to, not you, but a person, if you want to stay and you're okay with it, you'll probably start to adopt some of the
Sure.
things, right? Of the rhythms, the routines that I'm putting forth. On
Well,
the other hand,
particularly if I want to get along with you,
right.
right?
But on
Yeah.
the other hand, if you don't dig it, right, then you're going to leave. But my point is that the house that was built, that we go into daily, sees in many cases, and not everyone. I mean, I have, and I don't want to go to the cliche. I have white friends. I have men that I know, right, that are of different color. Brian, you being one of my my closest friends in these last 10 years of my life, just in terms of me being able to talk to you. I think a friend doesn't necessarily have to be a person that you hang out with all the time, but is it somebody you trust, right? Is it
Exactly.
somebody that you can trust with information about you and share? Um, and so if we can just take away that inferiority, that inferior component, I think that we start to move a layer of racism off, right? But then it's really the awareness, I think, that racism does in fact exist and,
Sure.
and is out there. And I think once we can grasp onto that as a community of one, it's not to say, and you know, anytime I'm in I get race fatigue. Sometimes I'll use it because if everything that I say, I'm saying, okay, yes, I'm Henry Young and I'm black. I'm Henry Young and I'm black. You know, that can be a dominant point, and that's not what I want to necessarily say that drives me to do things. But I'm just saying, like, I am who I am.
Right.
But with that being said, you know, the openness that I think people will allow themselves to say, yeah, you know what, you're right. You know, when I saw that young man walking down the street and his pants sagging, I might have clutched my purse. Now, and I want to say this too. I was thinking about you. So if I go somewhere and I see a young black man walking down the street, I have to be cautious that I don't lock my door, right? Because I am that black man in a lot of cases. But it's what our culture, it's what stereotypes that we have by virtue of movies, by virtue of what we show on TV and what we don't show, right? So I don't want to digress too much, but I would agree with you in terms of your definition of racism, just adding to the fact that the person that is leading the way or has the power and then views someone as inferior, that's where racism begins.
Well, and at its core, again, it's evil. So
I would agree.
again, and let's kind of advance on how people of color can flourish.
Sure.
As a Christian,
Hmm.
my conviction, this is the biblical ethic. And I might add as a caveat, if you study, and it sounds, sounds to me like you've done your homework on US history. Thomas Jefferson, who penned the Declaration of Independence, most of the founding fathers they were either deists or professing Christians and slaveholders.
Hmm.
Thomas Jefferson pens the Declaration of Independence that says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and been endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." All people. And he himself was a slaveholder. So there was a wrestling even from the founding of the country of, okay, this was the cultural accepted practice, and yet at the same time it is contradictory to core beliefs, a Christian tenet,
Hmm.
that all people are in the Magio Dei,
Hmm.
made in the image of God,
Hmm.
whether you're white, black, brown, yellow, or red.
Right.
That human life is sacred. This is the Christian conviction. Okay. So there are no inferior
Hmm.
races.
Hmm.
There's no such thing. There are, however, inferior behaviors.
Oh yeah.
So using your example, driving
Hmm.
down the street, I
Hmm.
see the young man with sagging pants.
Hmm.
That has literally, Dr. Young, nothing to do with his ethnicity.
That's exactly.
That is a behavior. So
Exactly.
it could be a white guy, it could be a
That's
black guy, it
right.
could be a brown guy, whatever.
That's right.
And I see somebody that is Anglo of
Hmm.
European descent who's
Sure.
acting like what my dad used to call, criminals or people in that world pukes. I was like, oh, that's great, Dad, that you came up with, but he was in law enforcement. I
Hmm.
don't care what color the guy is. I'm
Right.
still locking my door.
Right.
Right. So what, in my estimation, there's two things that we have to, in order for us to begin to make any progress
Hmm.
in these areas. Number one, an acknowledgement that racism exists and that it is evil. So again, I want to as a qualifier, say racism is immediately viewing somebody as less than because of their ethnicity.
That's right.
That is so unfair. And so again, it's just wrong. It's evil. So we have to acknowledge that is a part of our history, and that there is this residual to varying degrees in different parts of the country, as you've already alluded to, this kind of undertone and things that still kind of are there on both sides, right? I mean,
Mhm. Sure.
so we have to acknowledge that it is wrong and that it exists. But secondly, what we have to acknowledge is there, in the face of its existence,
Mm,
there are things we can do to overcome that
mm,
reality.
mhm,
And I look to you, sir,
mm.
as a shining example. I've been to your house. I know. I see you on a day-to-day basis. You are a person of excellence. You are a person of character. You have risen to the highest places of academia and are having a tremendous influence on the young people of today. And you've done all of this as a person of color in our society. What were the behaviors that led you to that place? And what could you speak to another generation of people to say, okay, listen, the hill may be a little steeper.
Mhm.
Again, this is the acknowledgement that racism exists. The
Right.
hill's a little steeper for a person of color. It is,
Yeah.
because of what we've talked about. This is what the left has deemed white privilege. Although I got to tell you, I grew up in a white house and ain't nobody handed me jack. Like, I had to go earn it, baby. I had to
Got
earn
it.
it. I
Got it.
never got a paycheck just because I'm a white guy.
Yeah.
But the reality is, there is generational wealth and resources and control
Mhm.
and all of the things that you've talked about that give somebody who is of European descent perhaps a leg up.
Yeah.
And the hill's a little steeper for a person of color. But how can a person of color overcome that and still flourish?
Well, I mean, that's a loaded question, but I think if I to first address it, I wouldn't say I think, but I would address it the first way in terms of first, it's important for you to know, what's your association, what's your oikos, what's your tribe look like, right?
Wow.
It's so vital that whoever you're around, that not to say, hey, and I appreciate the accolades, and I do appreciate you so much, Brian, of giving me the opportunity. Obviously, I'm not perfect. Obviously, I have worked consistently and persisted and had dreams of being where I am today, right? So I digress a bit, but so having a dream is going to be important. But your oikos, right, and who you're around,
Mm,
right? I have people that I know that if you're around people that don't aspire to do more, you won't aspire to do more, right? And
mm,
my mom always said you have friends for a season, right? So it may be important that, and as I view that, I go, all right, because I've got some really close friends that I've had some close friends that aren't necessarily close now, but they move away. I was an academic. Some of my friends did other things. Hey, we're men. We're trying to make our way in this world. But what I found is I had to really align myself with like-minded people, and I was fortunate to be in an academic environment that, even though I believe I was probably the second Black or African American professor here at the college,
mm.
even though that was the case, I still made sure to align with my colleagues, right? Now, there was some self-efficacy that I developed by virtue of my athletic prowess and my ability to play athletics, because
Mhm.
I was able to succeed irregardless. I was going to succeed, and I did it at most of my levels, right? In a way that showed me, all right, Henry, you're on the right path. But let me go back. So, who you're around, your oikos, is hugely important. And then also just thinking outside of the nine dots, like, what do you see in front of you? So my father, obviously, I mentioned earlier, he sold drugs. I tell a story where I was going to visit um, an uncle who was in prison in Denver when I was younger. And my dad and my mom and aunties, we were all in the car. And my dad goes into the liquor store and he comes out running. He's got this bag. So he starts telling my mom and my aunt, "Hey, put this money in your brassiere, put this in your pants." And I'm 6 years old. I'm going, "What the hell's going on?" Right. So in essence, my dad had robbed the convenience store.
Mm-hmm.
And we're on the way to visit someone in prison. Bottom line is, my next thing is that we want to turn our failures or others' failures, into a success for us. So we want to try to build off of. So I use that because my dad ended up going to jail for 12 years, not for that incident, for other things. And I could have gone down that road, or I could have gone the other road. So who you're around, your aspirations and the goals that you have, and it's all, I think dreaming. You have to dream big, right? I think Walt Disney said that in order to achieve the dream, you have to believe in the dream,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's, and I know one might say, "Oh, that's cliche. That's not paying my bills on a daily basis." And there's been days where I could barely pay my bills, but it was the dream element that I said I want to continue to aspire to be. So people dreaming, but also your faith is hugely important, right? Because on those tough days, what do you go back to? And I'm definitely a praying man, and my mom is she's a prayer warrior and has a group of people that have prayed for me and during my transgressions and backsliding and things. But your faith is hugely important, because if you don't have something residually to catch you during that struggle, then changing course is a lot easier, right? So I don't want to take up all the time, but I think those three things are important: who you're around, of course, dreaming big, and you may not make that aspirational peak, but at least you want to continue to say, "I'm ascending in some way." Also, commitment, persistence, working hard. And that all came from my sports because, as you know, B, I'm only
Right.
5'10", but, to get a scholarship and to Cal Poly Pomona and do the things I played in China for, didn't make any money, but for 6 weeks and did some traveling. It's only because I was shooting jumpers and dribbling and, just consistently working on my craft. So you have to be consistent. Okay, you have to be consistent.
Right. So, and using sports as an analogy, you and I know each other from our country club.
Mhm.
If you're going to play basketball, the basket does not know what color you are.
Don't know what color you
It's either the ball's going in the hoop or it's not.
Right.
And on the golf course, that little golf ball, it does not know and it does not care what
Here.
color you are. Either you can swing it or you can't.
That's right.
And there are some issues in life, as we've already discussed, where you're gonna run into people who are just evil. They're just evil people. And again, this isn't specific to um, what walk of life they're in. They're just evil people. We have to overcome that reality.
Yeah.
And the hill is a little steeper for people of color, but it can be done.
Mhm.
You are an exceptional man.
Thank you.
When you get a chance, um, there is an episode of this broadcast called How Not to Suck at Life. And item number one that was put forth in that broadcast is you need to have a vision for your
Mm.
life. That's what you're
Mhm.
talking about, the dream.
Yes.
Like where am I headed? Who am I? Who has God made me? What gifts and talents has He invested in me? How can I add value to other people? And then to surround yourself, as you said, with like-minded people. And again, this has nothing to do with their ethnicity. You need some people who share with you a value system of adding value and becoming all I can be. And again, these are the things that, in my view, are not Eurocentric.
Mm.
This has nothing to do with race. When you're talking about hard work, discipline, showing up on time, treating other people the way you would like to be treated,
Mm.
doing the very best you can, having a vision for your life, all of these things. This has nothing to do with being white or black. These are things that come from God and will be applicable to literally any place that you live. Thankfully, we live in a place that has offered us freedom. And so if you can, again, that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you can overcome. Final question before we get you out of here. There is, and we may not be able to cover all of this, but you can at least touch on it. Slavery is a stain on our history. There's no question about that. However, and acknowledging that is something we all need to do. A couple of thoughts. Number one, has there been an industrialized country in the history of human civilization that does not have in its history somewhere slavery? That's number one. Number two, remember we fought a war over this. I think there was 500,000 men that died in the Civil War. And then what was it, about 90 years later, we had the Civil Rights Movement and some huge breakthroughs to help level the scales. We're not yet fully leveled them, but we've helped made some progress. So is there your thoughts on those two things, number one, and number two, is there a country in the history of human civilization, in spite of our flaws, that has offered more opportunity for people of color than the United States?
No, again, so my training and learning education, I'm not a history major, right? So I was my MBA and my doctorate in accounting, lends me to the number size of the house. But if I was
to take some history to get the degrees, brother, come on.
I did. But those are those classes that I had to take, right?
Yeah.
Not that I like taking, but I would probably, without doing any extensive research, I would probably say that there's probably not one country that exists in the industrialized world that has not had slavery to some degree.
Sure.
I think that the way in which you define slavery, maybe it might be a situation where you're paying someone less than what they're worth, right? We talk about, even our sports athletes today have said something like, well, it's modern day slavery because we can't do what we want to do. Well, you guys are making millions of dollars, right? However, let me digress. I don't want to digress there. So two, I think that no. And so by virtue of that, that is probably innately in the fabric, right, of development. That is utilizing resources in a economies of scale way, to the degree where your costs are going down and you can increase your profit. And obviously slavery brings that about.
Yeah, because it's a labor issue.
It's
right?
a labor issue.
Right? If you go back to it was 300 years ago.
Yeah.
We got to have some labor to
Right.
develop this new country. And what's the cheapest labor is if I own the labor. Right.
Exactly. And so now where this goes awry, obviously, I think that you and I both know, is in terms of the laws and the legislative power or lack thereof, because we know we've come to through a situation or history where blacks haven't always been able to vote, women haven't always been able to vote, right? So, and we have that now. We have issues in our voting areas now where they're trying to develop zoning areas where voting can happen, and isolating maybe where blacks may not have a greater influence in their voting abilities, when we think about some of the things that has gone on in the past. But with that being said, again, I think that if I can add to that, when I think back about my ancestors and what they went through, I think that I owe it to them. I owe it to the lineage of my people to do as much as I can, understanding that they were slaves, right? But doing and rising, not necessarily, because I don't want whoever's watching this to say that, oh, Dr. Young is just about being at the top. No, it's about succeeding at the level that is balanced and acceptable for you.
Flourishing.
Right? Yeah, flourishing, right?
Yep.
Um, and then, to that, the second point, and I missed it. I think we went from, does slavery exist? Has it existed? And I missed the second caveat to that.
Well, no, and again, we'll just kind of reiterate,
Sure.
because some of the conversation, particularly coming from the far left, is that because America, the
Mm,
United States of America,
hmm
had in its founding,
hmm
slavery as a component, that it is
Right.
intrinsically flawed, and
Sure.
that the entire system needs to
hmm
be upended. And, some of what we had talked about, who's in control and this, that, and so
Yeah.
we gotta, take it all down to the foundation and, rebuild something else. I suspect that what they'd like to see is, more of a socialistic system, which is another podcast. But my point is that, yeah, America does have in its founding slavery. So does every other country in the world. So we're not unique, and so we're not uniquely flawed or sinful in our founding, because so was every other country. And we were one of the first. We weren't the first, but we were one of the first to jump on board abolition, to get rid of what
Right.
is. I mean, let's talk. I mean, let's just be real.
Sure.
You're talking about something that's horrible.
Right.
Okay, horrible.
Right.
No, but the second thing was so this is something everybody, no matter what side of the aisle we all have to agree that slavery was evil and bad, and there's a residual effect on generations even 300 years later. But the second thing is, what is also true is, has there ever been a country that's offered more opportunity for people of color than the United States?
I think that we are, and I can't speak for the entire. I can only speak for myself. First off, I want to make sure that I, strongly uh, say that I believe slavery obviously is wrong. I believe that there's elements of slavery that still exist. I believe that racism, unfortunately, is still with us in a lot of areas. Um, I also feel, though, that going to your point, that in America, that it is the land of opportunity. And
Hmm.
I do believe that it is important that, because of that, the opportunities are there. They may not be fair and equitable, but there's
No,
an opportunity,
and they
right?
never will be, Henry, because you're dealing with people.
Right.
So
Yes.
it doesn't matter where you live, life's
Right.
not going to be fair. Yeah.
So with that being said, really taking the bull by the horns, and as I mentioned earlier, identifying, your goals of what you want, establishing goals, right? Is critical, right? And then utilizing the mechanisms and the resources that you have. And hey, and if you have to move from one city to another, you got to move. You got to
Yep.
move from one state to the other. You got to move to where the resources are more plentiful, and where the areas that are suit you in terms of your growth.
Right.
Um, and but again, because I know that I may have some of my people, and I say my people being men of color, that might be watching this, to say, oh well, you've succeeded, so you don't understand the struggle. Brother, I do.
Yeah.
I understand the
Yeah.
struggle.
You have your own story, don't you?
I do. But it's really just about me saying that I'm going to rise above that struggle
Yeah.
so that I can provide. I think I've shared with you, Brian, my son is an anesthesiologist, works for UCLA, right? And he saw his dad and his mom both back academic. We set a standard for him. Both my daughters are teachers, master's degree, and my youngest daughter wants to be a doctor. But again, we helped to establish a standard,
Hmm.
right, of intellectual, of absorptive capacity that our family had, that then gave my children, they could leverage those opportunities for greater heights. But
Incredible.
yeah, and again, I think our church, our government can continue to do more to just bring awareness about where we are in the world today in terms of racism, but also where we're going. And I think that we're on a trajectory for a better society for everyone.
Well, I can say this, and this is, what we'll get you out of here with, Henry, that, in your ancestry, there was somebody that sold your ancestors to potentially one of my ancestors, who knows, and brought them over
Yeah,
here in a slave ship
sure.
to the country. And if
Mhm,
you are familiar with the book of Genesis,
mhm.
Joseph, the second youngest of the 12 sons of Jacob, was sold into slavery. And I am grateful, and I'm going to quote him. I'm grateful for you. I'm not thrilled that your ancestors were mistreated, but what was intended for evil,
Mm.
God turned into something good. And
Wow.
you and I wouldn't know each other if that atrocity hadn't happened. And I'm eternally grateful to God for that, because you've added value to my life.
And I appreciate you. I couldn't. I would hug you if I could. And you know that emoji that I send when you there's a brown hand and
Yeah,
there's a white hand, right? And I think that is just
absolutely.
so instrumental that we are together today on this podcast. And I thank you for the opportunity, my brother. And I'm glad that I could come through and be here for you. Anything I can ever do, I do, and I appreciate you. You don't know how much your being, you're just always so supportive. Like I said, you listen. You're easy to talk to, and I appreciate you too, my brother. Thank you so
I
much.
love you, and we'll have you
I
back on.
appreciate it.
We'll talk some more about this. Thank you so much for coming on, and hope that you have a
Okay,
fabulous rest of your day.
I love you as well, and you as well. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Talk to you soon. Dr. Henry Young, ladies and gentlemen. I know this podcast was longer than any that we've ever done, but the content's so very, very important, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Let's get you to this week's market update. Before we do that, we ask you to like, share, and subscribe this podcast and live stream. It helps promote our show and get it out to more and more people. Okay, let's get to the market update for this week, the week of April 17th, 2023. Last 30 days sold. This is single family residences. These are homes that have sold in Victorville, Apple Valley, Hesperia, Adelanto, Phelan, and Oak Hills. 314 homes sold in the last 30 days at a median sale price of $410,000. Okay, let's compare that year over year. We go back 1 year ago, between March 17th to April 17th. There were 395 homes that sold in that same period at a median sale price of $415,000. So year over year, we had no change from last week to this in our median sale price, 410, and year over year, no change. It was 415. So same as last week. So we're down 1.2% in our median sale price. We're down 20% in the number of homes sold. This, my friends, has mostly to do with inventory, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. How many do we have in escrow? We've got 561 homes in escrow, up 2.8% since last week. So the trajectory of the number of homes selling continues to go up a little bit as we come in now to the full swing of the spring home buying season. And the trend continues with active listings. We're down to 638 homes actively listed for sale. We're down 1.4% since last week. Interest rates, this is from Pride Stromset over at Vintage Lending, is at 5.875% to 6.9%. This is the standard FHA 30-year fixed loan that is most common in our area. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, before we sign off, the Check This Out segment. And if you are planning this summer to go on a vacation and you would specifically like to go to a beach resort vacation, I'm going to give you a couple of recommendations with a caveat, and that is that both of these places I'm going to recommend to you are very, very expensive. So you got to, have the money to do it. But if you can swing it, the first place is a resort down in Newport Beach called Monarch Beach. I had the privilege of going there with our best friends from New Mexico about 7 years ago, and it was potentially the best vacation I've ever had. I mean, just when you walk through the front door, the view of the Pacific Ocean there on the south coast of Newport Beach is breathtaking. And the second one's also down in that area. It's known as Pelican Hill. And my wife and I got a chance to stay there over my birthday. It was probably, I guess, about 3 years ago, and just again, a fantastic resort. You will enjoy it. And both of these places have tremendous golf courses. So if you're a golf nut like me, to stay there and play and take in the views, Pelican Hill actually has 36 holes, and that south course has ocean views on almost every hole. So if you get a chance and you're thinking about taking a vacation this summer and you've got the money to do it, those are two incredible places to go. We want to thank again Dr. Henry Young for coming on our show today, and what a tremendous guest he was. And hope that you will join us again next week for the Brian Hirsch Show. In the meantime, we are serving your dreams. We'll see you next week on the Brian Hirsch Show.